Welcome to episode number 3 of the Church Leadership Podcast. In this episode, Andy and I sit down with Dr. Rick Lance, who's the Executive Director of the Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
Welcome to episode number 3.
We're glad to have you on the podcast today, and our guest this week is Dr. Rick Lance from the Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions. He serves as the lead state missionary for our state Baptist organization and has done so since 1998. Dr. Lance, we're so glad to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Andy and Mark, both.
We wanted to just chat with you, Dr. Lance, and allow our listeners to get to know you a little bit, hear a little bit about your story, your background, and how you currently serve our state. So if you would like to share with us a little bit about yourself, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. Well, I was not born in Alabama, but I got here as quickly as I could. I was 3 years of age when I came to Alabama, grew up in Birmingham. I started real young as a pastor. It's almost unheard of now to be a pastor at 18, but wow. I was, and I began my first ministry there. What I did not know, as I look back, scares me to think about that. And I want to go back on an apology tour and tell people I'm sorry for some things, not just
I can relate to that, yep.
But that's kind of my beginnings. And then having served First Baptist Church Coleman and later First Baptist Tuscaloosa for 15 years, the Lord led me and felt the call to state missions, and I have been in this position now for more than 20 years. Hard to believe, but that's true.
That's wonderful.
That is hard to believe. That's amazing. Well, let's talk about that a little bit because, I want to talk about your career path, especially as a pastor, because a lot of the folks listening to this podcast are going to be pastors of local churches, and some small, some large. You've had experience in both.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the lessons you learned along the way as a pastor before becoming a state missionary.
Well, the first thing is, I would say to anyone, and this is kind of a no-brainer, but every so often, maybe annually, if not more regularly than that, a person really needs to do a ministry audit of themselves, asking themselves very strategic questions, go back to re-examine their calling, make sure their motives are pure, and that they have a good walk with the Lord and love the people they're trying to lead, because if you don't love them, you can't lead them.
That's exactly right.
That's a lesson that I have to keep learning over and over again.
Those are good lessons. That's good.
Well, in your role here in serving our churches here in the state, there's over 1 million Southern Baptists in our state. That's a lot of folks, and over 3,000 churches,
3,200,
over 3,200 churches in our state. That's a lot of churches. Some people might be confused on your role in those churches.
Right.
You are not Dr. Rick Lance, Pope of Alabama churches. So there's no
there are days
hierarchical
I'd like
structure.
to be, but
yeah,
I'm certainly not. No, we're not a connectional group. Baptists know this, others may not. There are some denominations which are connectional. We're a free church, and every church is autonomous, as we know that. And the churches themselves relate cooperatively through the avenues of missions in the life of Alabama Baptist life and Southern Baptist life, through giving through the cooperative program and participation in missions, and we help facilitate that. I wouldn't want to do a commercial as to what we do here at the State Board of Missions, but actually we minister in partnership with churches, associations, and the larger SBC family to fulfill the Great Commission with an Acts 1:8 strategy.
Amen. I mean, that's what we say a lot, is we're way better together than we are on our own.
Absolutely.
We can accomplish far more working together. We're on the same team, and it's wonderful when you get that aspect of not just cooperation over the table, but cooperation on the field.
Exactly.
When we're working together, reaching people and making disciples.
Well, I'm going to share a story before I ask the question.
All right.
Because, the folks listening, I don't know how well they know you, but I've gotten to know you over the years. And, you've heard people say, he will give you the shirt off his back. Well, Dr. Lance will literally give you the coat off his back, because I was doing a funeral a few years ago, and lo and behold, Dr. Lance shows up, and he was related to the person that we were doing the funeral for. It was a terrible, nasty day, cold, and I had no overcoat. And so Dr. Lance asked if I wanted to borrow his overcoat, and I said, well, thank you so much. But he would not let me give it back. So he literally will give you the coat off his back. But I say that to share, a lot of people think about your role, and they probably don't think about those moments where you get to influence pastors, leaders. Tell me a little bit about maybe some of the things you enjoy doing in your role here.
Well, I enjoy doing what we're doing right now, and that is being able to brainstorm, chat, consider the ramifications of what leadership means, discipleship means, following the Lord. And I simply want to say I've often become a little bit jaded about leadership books through the years, and I've been at this a good while now. There was a time I just consumed leadership books, and leadership lessons from Attila the Hun. I even read that one. But I'm now determined that, first of all, we have to remember we have to be good followers in order to be any kind of a leader for the Lord. Good followers of Christ in order to lead others for Christ. And the second little thing I'd say about that is my best avenue that I found in learning leadership is by observation, of course. I'm a people observer. I watch people. I've always kind of done that, read people, maybe read into people more than read out. But another thing, I love biographies, and I'm a self-taught, if you will, student of history. I never particularly, not putting anyone down, had great teachers in history, but I decided that I was going to learn more about the American history particularly, and then, of course, the vistas into world history and church history. If I were doing my education over, I would path it that way. But biographies give you an opportunity through the person and the personality to see that period of history, and then it grows out. Now, what that does for you with the personality you're studying, you get the strengths and the weaknesses. You learn lessons, and even if a biographer tends to be leaning toward a hagiography or kind of raising up a higher than he should be, you can read some of that out and read in the lessons and extrapolate the lessons and make it applicable to your life. I could give you illustrations of that, but I won't just go deep into all those kind of resources through the years. But I am a student of history, but mainly biography, and I do read with the sense of what can I learn in applying in my life as trying to be a leader, an effective leader.
That's awesome. What you got? Any recent biography you've read that's pretty impactful?
Well, I'm into military history now. I am very intrigued. This is the 75th anniversary this year of the D-Day invasion, and I never grow tired of studying the genius of some military leaders and the absolute foolhardiness of others. But in that day and in that time, when you take that crisis, world crisis, no one knew how that was going to come out. We look back in history and we think, oh, that was inevitable. Nothing was inevitable. Right. And it's the same in the throes of our life. We think, how are we going to get out of any kind of crisis we may think we're in now? But in hindsight, you can see lessons learned, and it helps me as I look back. Someone said, why do you study military history so much? Well, the first reason, my dad was a World War II veteran and flew in a B-17. And the second thing is I study war in order to make peace. The best way to know how to make peace is to study how you tripped into or stumbled into world conflict. And therefore, I have found that to be very insightful to do that. Now, I love presidential history. I don't ask me the favorites. That would probably position me. But the ones who, I'd have to tell you, the one who intrigues me most is one everyone loves, but I love him for a different reason. I really respect the contributions of George Washington because he was the first one.
Yep.
and he was the first doing it. There was no textbook on how to do this.
No template.
No, the template didn't exist. He had to have some people wanted to make him a king. Does that sound familiar? Biblical times, and he said, "Oh no, we're going to be elected officials." And to start something, to be the first, and then of course we had some who were mediocre, and maybe the times reflected the mediocrity of that. But the ones in crisis, who led in crisis experiences, are the ones that I probably glean more from, and I could spend some time telling you about who they are. But if you study presidential history, and there's another book out I would commend people to consider. It's on my book list to read. Is Gatekeeper, the study of the history of the position of chief of staff to the president. And how to the president's position, and how relatively new that is, and how instrumentally important it is. It's very influential. Gatekeepers determine access, and that you can learn a lot from that. And there have been some good gatekeepers, and there have been some not so good gatekeepers. But
We'll try to put that in the show notes we have on our podcast where people can have access.
I'm not
to that.
plugging a book, but
Sounds like a good resource.
That's
Yes.
what we do. We try to encourage people with good, tangible, specific ways they can access resources. So, of the books you've read and the experiences you've had in your years of ministry, is there anything that sticks out to you? It's kind of been a memorable watershed moment, or something you've learned from to glean and kind of move forward, or maybe something even now you're still learning you'd like to share with everybody?
I'm learning now. I try to, again, observe others and try to learn from them, but the lessons I've learned, the greatest lessons have been when things didn't go well. You can call them a failure. I don't like to use the word failure too much. I don't like to use the word success. I think the word effectiveness is better than success. Success means it's kind of materialistic. It's kind of pedestalizing people. It's the rich and famous kind of approach, the athletes. And I guess I kind of grow weary of all the success stories. I want to know how you can be effective. And there are a lot of people who are effective that we don't even see. For instance, I travel the state. I'm in far more churches which are very small than there would be the large to larger ones. And I'll have to tell you, I am really impressed with pastors who serve smaller sized churches, who may be what we call bivocational or co-vocational, and by choice. That group, bivo and co-vocational, the diversity on that landscape is bigger than the diversity of those who are called into full-time ministry, and they have that singular focus. And they also have to be much better at prioritizing than you would think that ones who have just one singular focus could prioritize, but actually it demands priority, planning, and they usually do it better than the ones who are full-time. And I've been impressed with that. Probably the times when I have felt like that whether it's in sermons or in leadership moments, when I just felt like I didn't get it right, the perfectionism in me leads me to evaluate that to the point of the paralysis of analysis.
Yeah, that can happen. I've experienced that. All right, I want to ask you about something specific. We were talking before we began recording this morning, and that is, you guys here at the State Board of Missions, you made a major move in the last year. In fact, you said this month as a year, you moved the entire campus, the entire organization from downtown Montgomery to here in Prattville, which we're at now. Talk a little bit about that, maybe how that came about and some of the lessons, because that, to me, that is a huge test of leadership. And I know pastors and leaders who are listening to this, it may not be a move, may not be a relocation, it may not even be a construction, but there are major shifts in ministry at times, and that's a test of leadership. So tell me a little bit about how that occurred and some things that you learned or did well or not so well in that.
Okay, a little context. The facility we left was built in 1962, and it was built for a day and a time next to Baptist Hospital, Baptist South in Montgomery, a little bit south of downtown. It was built for a day, and it was literally a a nuclear bomb shelter. It was that thick. The walls were thicker even than the Baptist Hospital. When they at Baptist Hospital were thinking about building an administrative facility, Bobby Du Bois, our associate, he received a call and they were giving him a heads up. And we had off and on conversations for years with Baptist Hospital about them purchasing our property. And we were hoping that one day we could be in the Prattville area. And in all honesty, with the Great Recession that's happened, it seems like ancient history now, but it's not that long ago, I sort of gave up on that. It's like a dream that was not going to be realized. But when that phone call came, it precipitated the CFO and others to come over. And when she, the CFO, viewed our facility and saw that it fit their needs, she said, "When can you get out of this building?" And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Baptists don't operate like that."
That's right. That's right.
We had to vote on everything. On everything we
Got
had
to
to vote.
form a committee, and that's
Well,
right. Yeah.
we already had that,
Yeah.
but there are enough of the hoops that we go through, and all that is accountability. So and I said to her, I said, "We're out of debt. We're not going into debt. We're not going to go back into debt. We've learned the lessons from that. I'm a debt averse person. I try to keep overhead as much as possible. Did that as a pastor to the degree I could control that. So I just simply casually said to her, "Well, what are you going to do with the property you have in Prattville? Are you going to use all that property?" And she said, "Well, no." I said, "Well, then that would be a good place." And later, as they were talking with us, I said, "You guys build buildings for doctors and others and medical buildings. Why don't you just build a building?" I took the keys out of my pocket and I said, "I'll give you these keys representing this facility, and you give us those keys and we'll call it even." Well, after an appraisal was made, that's about as close to even as you can get. We didn't have a dime out of pocket except some expense in moving things up here.
Right.
And with our staff being less than half the size it was when I came, we didn't need but about half the space. Really, we have less than half, 45% the space. It is more compact. It is more cost efficient. It's more forward thinking. 21st. It fits us. It's a customized home for us. It is not the quality building. We could never build that kind of building. It would have taken a budget buster to do that. But I rarely use the word providential, but I would on that one. That I don't use the term God thing, but providential. That was providential, and the yeoman's amount of work was done by Bobby Du Bois, our associate executive director, state missionary, who does a lot of the COO and CFO things. He's a bright fellow. He's a get-her-done guy, and he was a point person on that. And all of the staff cooperated. We had very little negative things happen. It was so flawless, it doesn't really reflect reality. And I told you earlier, only had one person to complain, and it was more of a concern than a complaint. And in my ministry, I've never done anything. When somebody didn't have a chorus of complaints, I was prepared for all that.
That's right. Well, in church and Baptist world, that's a small miracle. That's like parting the Red Sea almost, one complaint. It's pretty.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
Maybe parting it several times.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, I want to ask you a couple more questions we want to ask. One is, we think about your career, think about your life. If I were to ask you, who were some of the people who most influenced you? Because I think, for me, I look back at my ministry, and God's still, teaching me every day. But I think about those people who maybe even at the time I didn't realize it, but were really influential in my life and ministry. And so I would ask you, looking back, who were some of those people that greatly influenced who you are?
I may surprise you on this, but my father, who I referenced him earlier, World War II vet, I always looked up to him, but he died when I was 18. I'm going to have to tell you, the people who have influenced me more have been lay people. A lay person led me to the Lord. A lay person discipled me. Lay people nurtured me as I was coming along, of course. And as a pastor, I tended to gravitate toward the older leadership, the more mature leadership in the churches, and they were very nice to give me the kind of benefit of the doubt, the nurturing that I would need as a young pastor. And even here, I would have to tell you that the people that you would not know and others listening may not know have been as much of an influence on me as the so-called big name people. In fact, more so. I value close relationships. I'm not an extrovert fully. I'm not an introvert fully. I took a psychological many years ago, 10 being extrovert, 1 being introvert, and I was a 5. So
Right in the middle.
yeah, well, I guess that's schizophrenic, but I really do enjoy relationships, but I'm also very task-oriented, so you got to balance that. The influencers on my life have been the people with whom I've worked, that is, in the church and in here. I could name some preachers, I guess, who have been influential. I would have to give credit to my seminary professors. I think they were very influential at an opportune time, formative time in my life. They're dead and gone there and wouldn't be known by the audience. But they made it a very valuable contribution to me.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. I love to hear, the stories about that, because you're right. I mean, usually it's those people you don't expect that have the greater influence.
Well, the way we usually try to wrap up our time together.
Yeah. Oh, we're wrapping up. My goodness.
Yeah.
I'm just getting started.
As a pastor once said, in conclusion.
Yeah. Well, maybe several times.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah. And then he followed that up several more times with, we'll be wrapping up. One of the things we try to ask of those that we get to spend time talking with and people listening in on our conversation is there something that you feel like you might be able to share with someone? Because there's more than likely someone who's listening to this who needs some encouragement. Okay. They would love to hear something from someone that has something to share that would be not just challenging but just helpful and encouraging. So,
well, I want to quote David Brooks, who's an author of a book most recently simply titled Character. And he made a distinction between résumé virtues and eulogy virtues. He said most of us live our lives focusing on our résumé virtues and trying to get through life, trying to impress people, trying to move through the challenges and the various seasons of life. But when you look back at life, the eulogy virtues, those things that people remember about you, are far more important. And I would challenge all pastors to think about live their lives and do their ministries, understanding, hopefully God gives them time, that it is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Look at the end and think about how you want it to be. Remember the well done and my good and faithful servant. That's what you want to hear. You want to be faithful. You want to be fruitful. Keep in mind your character, because they don't give Academy Awards for character. But people with pure characters make a difference in the world. And then I would ask everyone to consider, when you think about all of the qualifications that you may have, one of the key questions that anyone in leadership at any level needs to ask: am I compatible with what I'm doing? Compatibility factor is one of the most overlooked considerations in development of leadership. I tell pastors when they're going to churches, you're competent. You've got all the qualifications. You've got to ask, am I compatible with this? So I would focus a bit, after you get through with the character development, knowing your competency, your skills, ask yourself, are you compatible? And try to keep that in the forefront.
That is great. That's great advice. That's awesome. Well, we have thoroughly enjoyed this time. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being a part of this podcast, and I think it's going to be a great encouragement and definitely a resource to equip
Thank
leaders.
you. You've honored me by asking me to do this. I thank you for it.
Well, who knows? Maybe there'll be a part 2 down the road, but definitely thank you.
We appreciate your time, Dr. Lance, and we hope by everyone who has listened to this podcast today that you've been better encouraged and equipped to be a leader in Jesus' church. Thank you for listening.
We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Church Leadership Podcast. We hope you'll join us again next week.